The story of three puppies written by Jebodiaz Muadi. Dedication. This book is dedicated to one of my two best friends. Her name was Bear. She was a beautiful brownish golden chow chow. During our brief time together, she was like my second half. She was spoiled, but she was also fair and treated humans and pets alike respectfully. Bear was there when I was at my best, and at my low points in life. I lost everything: money, status, and purpose. The hardest moment in my timeline is when I could no longer provide shelter, the love and care that Bear needed. Chow chow equals hair, so there was not a day as to where she could go without grooming. I guess this was our bond. Within the story of three puppies, boxes are intentionally placed within the short story, which allows the reader to question one's own reality. Because sometimes, we know how we feel and are left with the question, what if and why? Which brings me back to Bear. I had to find someone to adopt Bear, while also agreeing to help financially, along with visits as per requested by the now owner's terms. Yet on my first visit, in the pen where I had delivered Bear to the woman and her autistic son, which I considered because of Bear and the trust that she had for this boy. Inside of the pen was a pit bull with all of the equipment for training fighting dogs. I was told that the woman and her son moved to New York. Something inside of me made me believe in happiness ever after and that Bear is in a better place, when reality tells a different story. Chow chow puppies are valued and due to Bear's age. Older chow chows will not produce puppies. Even if she is not fixed, in which Bear had undertaken led me to believe that this was the adoptee's intention, and that when breeding was not possible, she may have been used for the unthinkable. To Bear, my friend, I wish that circumstance did not take you away. You live within me, so there is no bond that can be broken, nor peace that I receive and that you will not share. Bear, I shared our story because you played a significant role in the man I am today. Therefore, I am proud to share your name along with the impact that you brought to my life. May peace and blessings be upon you because you live in me. Jebodiaz Muadi. Innocence. This is the small city in which I live, where there is not much to write home about and much less to see. Once a year we have a local festival, along with a parade here and there. The people are hard-working and opinionated as many around the world. Most keep to themselves as he or she goes about the daily hustle and bustle of life. Always one step ahead of the bill collector, I assume. The town green is about as big as the high school football field, and believe it or not, we also still have a few mom and pop stores downtown. Not to be confused with the corporations, they have outlets everywhere. However, I guess it's just my way of sharing Harbor's crossings. The city is located between Connecticut and New York State. The trees and foliage draw people from surrounding municipalities during the autumn season. At Christmas there is a light display that lights up a waterfall and a pond that overlooks the valley below. Most of the locals here grew up together, and although ethnically diverse, we interact in some shape or form. 2 football teams, 2 high schools, and 1 mall. So just as our paths cross, so to gossip and intel on whatever is gossip worthy. Not to say that we do not have our fair share of problems. There are the bad sections, good sections, and then there's the section not to be stuck in after dark. I guess this is where this story begins. Growing up in Harbor's Crossing, I was raised on 53, Turning Road. The street was a dead end and Miller's Farm sat across the open field. This is where I would come to know Kevin Toliver and the Toliver family. I am the youngest boy with 2 older sisters, and I am 3 years older than Kevin. The Tolivers bought the house across the street from the Sims family. Having 2 more children, the Sims needed a bigger house, so I guess it made sense. At the time I was just beginning 4th grade. Summer was now over and there I stood with the other kids waiting for the bus. Kevin, your snacks are in your backpack. Mrs. Toliver stood holding onto Kevin's hand looking intently as the bus driver pulled up. Mrs. Toliver has dark brown hair with a firm body. My mother told my father that she was a cheerleader in high school. Okay kids, no pushing in place on the seatbelts located at the sides of the armrests, the driver said with a stern voice. Page 1. Consequence. All rise. The Honorable Judge Harold Rich presiding. You may be seated. The courtroom was filled, and news outlets and bystanders packed the courtyard. The state of Connecticut versus Kevin Toliver. Kevin Toliver had been charged with 21 counts of first degree, arson in the first degree, 19 counts of assault in the first degree, and making 10 threats in the first degree. The trial consisted of only 2 members for the victims' families and 3 family members for Kevin Toliver because there were too many victims in this case. The courtroom could not accommodate this many people, and for safety reasons. I was the only person to sit with the defendant because Mr. and Mrs. Toliver were being held without bond as co-conspirators in the case. Although neither was present, nor had they taken part in the horrible acts that their son carried out. They were being charged with a new law that makes it a crime to groom or enable terror and or acts thereof. The case lasted for 3 long weeks with testimonies from the young and old who survived the day that local news called the day we must forget. There were also psychologists, pathologists, forensics, fire marshals, detectives, and EMTs. All took the stand in voicing what was discovered and what their respective opinions were regarding the evidence collected. Prior to this event, life was like any other day. Prices were on the rise, DIY and reality TV flooded the airwaves. While politicians were at odds and some calling for an uprising. Smaller groups grew smaller, while some smaller groups became large groups. One calls for peace while another calls for war. One group wants more restrictions, the other wants less. Most of us believed that these groups and politicians were just talking and harmless. Kevin Toliver has shown us just how wrong we can be. Judge Ridge is a tall man with black and gray hair with dark eyes almost black. The prosecutor was average height, red hair with a goatee. The only time that I saw him without a box of files in his hands was when he was presenting the case. The courtroom itself is modern with enough room to seat 75 people. The jury was seated off to the left and the judge's bench stood directly in the center of the aisle. There is also a door to the right which the sheriff stood next to. The same door which the 3 sheriffs who stood behind Kevin had bought him out from. Page 2. Puppies for sale. The bus ride was filled with voices talking about summer and the fun things that they had done. Kevin was quiet and sat looking ahead as the bus pulled into the school drop-off. For me, the day was like any other. I caught up with friends while checking out the new kids. For me, school was everything because of where I lived. There wasn't much development, and the nearest homes were about a mile away, having no stores or parks in that direction. It was easier to go into town than it was to what my friends called farmland on the outskirts of town. Although Kevin was younger than me, there were no other houses on our street. One day Mr. Toliver, a military-looking man who looks like a lumberjack, came over to speak with my father. Hello, my name is Kevin Toliver and I'm your new neighbor. He extended his hand as a greeting. Hello, and yes, I see that you purchased the Sims place, well, the Tolivers now. My father said with a grin. I see that your son is usually playing outside around the time that my boy is. I was wondering if every now and then Kevin Jr. could come over to play? Robert, come over here, there's someone that I want for you to meet. As Mr. Toliver was waving his hand, I could see from the corner of my eyes Kevin making his way across the street. Robert, this is our new neighbor Kevin, and his son Kevin Jr. Kevin Jr. would like to come over to play, if it's okay with you? Sure, Dad, come on. Kevin as the 2 headed for the side of the house. As time went on, Kevin would come over every day and sometimes I would go to play in his yard. Kevin, come quickly. Your father has something for you." Mrs. Toliver called out from the front door. "Quickly come, Robert. Let's go see." Kevin was filled with excitement, and so I followed. "Look in the box, Junior." Mr. Toliver stood next to the box as Kevin opened it. Inside of the box were 3 puppies. "Dad, are we going to give one to Robert?" Kevin said with a smile. "No, son, Robert's parents may not want pets, but Robert is welcome to come and see the pups whenever he would like to." The puppies all looked alike except for the color patches. Each puppy had unique patterns. The puppies were so small yet playful. Kevin named one Tiger, another Spike, and the last one he named Bear. However, the next day Kevin would tell me that his father had renamed them Attack 1, Attack 2, and Attack 3. Page 3. Lessons learned. 2 years had passed, and I was no longer in elementary school, and Kevin was now in the 4th grade. Up until this point, most of the time we have spent working on bikes or talking about bikes. Today was different though. "Robert, look at this, my father bought it for me." Kevin held his hand out, and he was holding that looked real. Before I could get the words to come out of my mouth, my parents don't allow goo. "Robert, you come in here right now. Kevin, it's time for you to go home." There was no doubt that when my father came home there would be a family discussion. "Mom, I was about to let Kevin know that you and Dad did not allow, but you called me inside." "I know, Robert, I saw the whole thing. However, I am still going to inform your father." That night my mother did so, and my dad said that he would speak to me after speaking to Mr. Toliver. The next day was a weekend, and I was helping my father wash his car when the Toliver's garage door opened. "Wait here, Robert, I'll be right back." My father waving his hand to get the attention of Mr. Toliver as he walked towards the car pulling out of the driveway. The car stopped and Mr. Toliver exited the car. "Hi, Bill. What can I do for you today?" "Hey, Kevin, I wanted to speak to you about Kevin Jr. bought over to my house yesterday." "Oh, that. But it looks real, doesn't it?" Mr. Toliver said with a smile. "I did not say we don't have things in our home, nor do we allow our children to play with them." Mr. Toliver stopped smiling as he began to speak. "My apologies, Bill, I had no idea, and I will let Kevin Jr. know that he is not to bring his toy weapons over to your house." "Thank you, Kevin. By the way, Bill, not trying to tell you how to raise your son. We are living in a world where bad things happen, and bad things are waiting to happen. This is why I must prepare my boy now, for what is to come." "Well, that is your choice, Kevin. I respect your view, Bill, but I do not agree with it. However, as my neighbor, I just want you and your family to know that your property is safe. I have cameras installed on my property and enough to stop a dinosaur." "That's good to know, Kevin, but I think that we will be okay." Page 4. A racist home is a happy home. I would often go over to the Tolivers for dinner, and sometimes Kevin would eat at our house. He was like family, and we went to the movies, parks, and to the beach together. Kevin saw me as his big brother, and I saw him as the little brother that I never had. As I got older, he and I spent less time together, but no matter what I was doing, I had always made time for Kevin. Over the years, I would see Kevin and his family either leaving for the gun range or hanging various flags around the property. On Sundays, the family would dress up in camouflage and play war games with paintball guns. Looking back, I thought that was cool, and I always wanted to go over and play. However, my father had a bad experience with guns which he and my mother never spoke about. So, I would just get on my bike on those days and ride into town. The 3 puppies were now fully grown dogs. I always found it strange that one of the puppies they kept in the house. One of the pups had a long chain attached to it, and the other was allowed to run freely around the property. The two dogs that were outside the Toliver's home would often be used in their war games. They were like a search and rescue or search to secure an enemy type of role. I will never forget the day that Attack 3 broke free of his chain and Kevin asked if I would help him and his father look for him. After searching the neighborhood and the fields that surrounded our homes, Mr. Toliver would notify the local authorities. Mr. Toliver? Officer Dan Tanner. The police walked over with a pen and pad in his hand. Yes, officer, my dog broke his chain, and we cannot locate him. Can you provide the breed or a possible photo? The dog is a mutt with patches of black and brown on white fur. His name is Attack 3 and you may have to put him down. He can get vicious, Mr. Toliver exclaimed. After the policeman and Kevin's father left, and only me and Kevin remained, he would turn to me and say something that I would never forget. Robert, the dog, would not hurt a fly. Yet Attack 1, who is always in the house, is the mean one. When Attack 2 is eating, he will steal his food. When Attack 3 is playing with a toy, Attack 1 takes it. Neither is allowed in the house, and both get disciplined if they were to do the same. What my father did not tell the police is that he beat our dog because Attack 1 wanted a toy that he was playing with. Kevin, having shared this, showed no emotion as if it were normal. 2 days later, the dog was reunited with the Tolivers. Page 5. Closing arguments and sentencing. The courtroom was silent as Judge Rage informed the defendant and the prosecution of the jury's decision. Will the defendant please rise? Mr. Toliver, after 4 days of deliberation, the jury has found you guilty on all charges brought forth by the state of Connecticut. The courtroom erupted with loud cheers and tears of relief. Order! Order! The judge's gavel sound fills the room, simultaneously telling those cheering to remain seated and quiet, or to leave the courtroom. Instructing the prosecutor to read aloud the events leading up to the jury's determination of guilt. Your Honor, on March 30th, 2024, Mr. Toliver made a phone call to Ms. Kennedy, a student who testified that during this phone conversation with the defendant, Mr. Toliver stated that the high school that the two attended was teaching equality and that the school had sold out to foreign influence. Mr. Toliver stated that a civil war was the only way to take the school back. When asked by Ms. Kennedy how would any type of violence make it right, Mr. Toliver said, to wait and see. On April 9, 2024, Mr. Toliver was escorted to the school's guidance department where he was met by Detective Stone, who was also the school's guidance counselor. Mr. Toliver was caught giving a knife to another student who was not mentioned by name due to age. Detective Stone testified that 2 knives were removed from Mr. Toliver's person and that his parents were notified. Mr. Toliver stated to the detective that he was on the wrong side in the fight. When asked to elaborate, Mr. Toliver would say, the yellow people and the over, stealing our jobs, resources, and our women. Now we must teach them that they are not equal. Detective Stone shared what he had heard from Mr. Toliver with Mr. and Mrs. Toliver. The parents stated that Kevin is harmless and that he would not hurt anyone. The two shared that they themselves did not own any weapons and that he must have gained access to the weapons from some of the black students, assuring the detective that they in no way meant for it to be taken in a racist view, adding a smile. Mr. Toliver was suspended for 1 week along with 1 week of in-school detention. Detective Stone also made a request to Mr. and Mrs. Toliver to research the idea of therapy due to Kevin Jr.'s racist comments and views towards the other students. Mr. Toliver took offense, making the comment, "My family speaks the English language," then stormed out of the room. Page 6. My awakening. These past 3 weeks throughout the trial has taken all that I had within me. Here I sit as the neighbor and only friend to a 16-year-old kid who I never knew, or was I too preoccupied to see the signs? To know that this kid, he did what? Something that I will never truly understand, and something too terrifying to accept. I remember the time. Kevin was 15, I had just turned 18. Mr. Toliver invited me over for the weekend. I was graduating and he planned a camp over in his backyard while cooking over a fire pit. "Congratulations, Robert," Mr. Toliver said with a hand raised awaiting a high five. "We had hot dogs, hamburgers, and Mr. Toliver even gave me a beer. The military is a big step, son. So, if you're old enough to die for our country, then you're old enough to have a beer." It's funny because I had always called Kevin Jr. Kevin Jr., however, everyone around town would call him Damien. I guess that it was from the time when Mr. Toliver renamed Tiger, Spike, and Bear. Yet he always answered Kevin Jr. when it came to me. "Son, I haven't forgotten about you. You know Robert isn't going to be there for you, because he needs to do a greater service. Between the you're going to need protection." The yellows was a word that Mr. Toliver used to describe all of the ethnic groups in between whites and blacks. Mr. Toliver handed Kevin Jr. a box and a package. Inside of the box that were hand-carved. The blades were black with ivory handles. One of the very same involved in the school incident. Inside of the package was revealed to be a semi. At this time my life was more centered on classmates and teammates because I was a co-captain on the high school football team. I was also enlisted into the Army, so I was more than thankful to the Tolivers for planning the camp over. As the trial and testimony progressed, I fell into many moments of reflection. What could I have done? Why did I not see? And why did Kevin Jr. feel that he could not confide in me? So many thoughts and left with no answers. However, one thing was absolutely clear to me. Is that once the sentence has been passed down and Kevin Jr. walks through the door to my right, he and I will no longer be friends. He will no longer be the harmless kid whom I once built bikes with, because this is not the person sitting in front of me. Page 7. The day we must forget. Your Honor, it has been established that on April 9, 2024, after having received the school suspension, Mr. and Mrs. Toliver brought their son Kevin Jr. to my on Highway 7, where Mr. Toliver purchased for Kevin Jr., which in fact was the weapon used in this horrific and senseless crime. After the Tolivers arrived at their 54 Turning Road address, Kevin Jr. then proceeded to log into the extremist website Patriotism has /a/price. It was at this point as to where Mr. Toliver posted the manifesto entered as evidence, calling for civil war. Mr. Toliver then posted a photo of himself in camouflage holding the weapon that would eventually be used in this crime. The photo had a caption warning hunting season. The court has proved that after the online posting, Kevin Jr. entered the Helping Hands Youth Center. In doing so, Kevin Jr. then proceeded to chain lock exits, while placing him throughout the establishment. Mr. Toliver then made his way to the front of the building, trapping the 40 victims inside. Your Honor, since the defendant's guilt has been determined, I would like to read the victim's account of events. You may proceed. As the judge and the entire courtroom looked on intently silent. According to Mr. Suttle, who was the director of Helping Hands, who was also the first person to encounter Mr. Toliver. Mr. Toliver fired Mr. Suttle. Everyone shut up and sit on the floor as the first device rattled the room. Men, women, and children began to panic while holding one another on the floor. While some could be heard praying, and it was at this point as to where Mr. Toliver began his rant. God. Did you just say God? We are your God, the white people. We have always been superior, and none of you will ever be equal to us. You are all less than dogs. Mr. Toliver then proceeded to fire at random. As the victims began to run into the corridors, seeking the emergency exits. The fires that were now burning out of control forced the victims back to the main entrance. Mr. Toliver awaited, and for the ones that refused succumbed to smoke inhalation. Police made their way into the building where they located Mr. Toliver standing next to a condiment machine drinking a soft drink, surrounded by deceased victims lining the floor around him. When ordered to the ground, Mr. Toliver told the officers, "I made it easy for you. Like monkeys in a barrel, I took down a variety." Page 8. The victims. Kevin Jr. just sat there, no emotion nor empathy. Kevin Jr. never looked at me once during the trial. I guess that was to be expected because it was the military that informed me of the events. However, it was not until a marshal showed up at my door with Kevin Jr.'s request to have me sit in the court on his behalf. So many years, so many days, and so many conversations, and yet, who is this person sitting in front of me? I mean, growing up I am guilty of using the N-word and may have commented on a race of people. I thought it to be either good fun or that the person might have cut me off while turning right. Just something to say and harmless. The one thing that I have learned about myself is that words matter and that words can affect. "Mr. Suttle, are you ready to address the court?" the judge asked. Mr. Suttle, with the marshal assisting him, due to paralysis resulting from his injuries. "Yes, Your Honor, and thank you." Mr. Suttle looked directly at Kevin Jr. as Kevin Jr. stared back. "Kevin, you called me a..." My real name is Ivor Stepanski, and my family came to this country from Croatia in 1993. My father was in the military, and at that time people who shared the same Croatian blood as me were being massacred for their beliefs. This is the reason why I started Helping Hands, because I learned that we all have a right to exist. Seeing war as a child, I knew that I had to do whatever I could do in order to help the youth of today, not to make the same mistakes as our parents might have made. Kevin, my family came to this country from a prison. Yes, I was younger than you when I myself was in prison number 92251 Mr. Suttle rolled up his sleeve to show number 92251 tattooed on his arm. Some in the court began to cry. Even the judge looked sympathetic. "Tell me, Kevin, do you feel anything knowing that I fit your definition of a white person? This is what makes you not a racist, not a patriot. You harm children, women, and men with no regard for human life, while hiding behind your pathetic excuse as to why your life took a drastic turn. You ranted about taking jobs, stealing women and immigrants as you caused irreversible harm and terror to innocent people. Lastly, I will say this. Helping Hands will rebuild and thrive stronger than ever. Not one victim will ever be forgotten as long as the building stands. My only hope is that some of the people who help us to rebuild are people who once thought like you." Thank you, Your Honor, as Mr. Suttle backed away from the podium. Page 9. Puppies. "Mr. Toliver, would you like to address the court before I hand down sentencing?" The judge stared down Kevin Jr. over his thick black glasses. Kevin Jr. stood before the court, having not testified in his own defense. "I would like to tell the story that my mother told me. Growing up, I had 3 puppies. My mother kept one of the dogs in the house. It was her favorite. The dog could do no wrong. I remember once the dog bit the technician working on our dishwasher. She became offended when the technician failed to apologize. She said that this dog represents us, and that no matter what we do in life we have the right to. The second puppy she allowed to run about the property but was not allowed inside the house. However, one day he got in while we brought groceries into the house. She dragged him into the backyard and beat him badly. She said that this dog is only allowed to protect us and the property. This is his purpose, to serve us. I was confused at that point because the third puppy was always chained. So, I asked her, why is this one always chained up? She told me that the third puppy is a N-word. Undeserving and always looking to get into something. That if he were to be allowed to get loose, he would impregnate every dog in the neighborhood. Your Honor, I told this story to say, these puppies were brothers from the same mother. Yet they were each treated differently, so I never could understand this question. Maybe you might have an answer once I'm done? If I am wrong for my actions, then what about a God who tells a group of people that they are his people, and yet I am not? Kevin Jr. takes a seat. May the defendant please stand. Mr. Toliver, you have been found guilty on all counts. Before I hand down my sentence, I have something to say. Never in my time as a sitting judge would I have ever fathomed sentencing a 16-year-old for such a horrific crime. I also see you as a victim due to the fact that your parents enabled your actions. Mr. Toliver, your parents failed you. At a time when you should have been enjoying life and making friends. It appears that your parents were pushing all of their shortcomings and dissatisfaction in life upon you. As of today, they have deprived you of your adulthood as well, not God. The puppies were being abused, Mr. Toliver. In this I am sympathetic, but choice was made by your parents as well, not God. My hope is that you find those answers that you are seeking. However, it is my judgment that you will serve the remainder of your natural life within the Department of Corrections. Mr. Kevin Toliver Jr., on this day, June 14, 2025, you are hereby sentenced to 21 life sentences to run consecutively to one another. The court is adjourned. Page 10.